You might picture a quiet southern town.
Yeah.
Maybe a sleepy courthouse square.
Welcome to the deep dive.
But what if that same
Today,
place was once a roaring
we're
river
zeroing
port,
in on something.
so vital it earned the nickname Queen
deceptively
City
simple.
of a major waterway?
A town
Pretty
square.
surprising, huh?
But it really is.
Specifically,
What's
we're taking a
fascinating
deep
here is
dive
how
into
a
the history
seemingly
and
ordinary
evolution of
location
the one in Warren,
can hold a
Arkansas.
past that
Right.
completely,
Our sources for this
upends our
journey
initial
are a
perceptions.
really rich collection.
It really highlights the
historical
dynamic
profiles,
nature of history, doesn't
architectural
it?
records.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the kind of surprise we
local
love to
encyclopedias
unpack. Gives us a pretty detailed
One of you
picture.
sent us a
Yeah,
detailed
and our
history.
goal isn't
Camden,
just,
Arkansas,
to describe a
from
place.
river
We wanna
post to regional
understand how the
hub,
central hub has
1800,
mirrored
1955.
Warren's journey.
It's economic.
Our mission
shifts.
today is to dive
Exactly.
deep into
It's
Camden's
growth
story
and the changing
understand how
patterns
its
of its
unique
community
geography,
life,
the shifts
over
in
the
its
decades.
economy,
It's like reading the
and
story of a
the
town
determination
etched
of
right
its
into
people
its heart.
transformed it.
That's a good way to put
From
it.
a
Think of it
frontier
that way.
outpost
Yeah.
into a
Because when you stop
significant
and think
regional
about it,
hub
a
by
town
the
square is far more
mid-20th
than
century.
just
Right.
open
We're talking
spaces and buildings.
steamboats,
Oh,
Civil
absolutely.
War
It's a
drama,
living record of a community
a timber
story.
boom driven
So
by
let's jump right
railroads,
in.
and even
How
a
can
role in
single
national
town square
defense.
tell us
It
so
sounds
much
like a
about
microcosm of
community's
bigger
past and present?
changes.
Okay,
If we
let's unpack
consider the
this,
broader
starting with
historical
how Warren
context,
itself
Camden's
came
journey
to be.
really mirrors, the
Well,
major
Warren's
transitions of the
beginnings
American
as the
South.
Bradley
How
County
so?
seat,
Its
they
initial
date back
reliance
to
on
the early
agriculture and river
1840s,
transports,
Right.
followed
The
by
location was
embrace
selected
of
by
industrialization
commissioners, and then in
and,
1841,
modern
two local
infrastructure.
residents, John H.
It's a
Marks and
familiar
John
pattern,
Splon,
but
they
the
made a
specifics
pretty
here are
significant
unique.
contribution.
This source
Donating
gives us a
land,
really
was it?
comprehensive
donating
look, doesn't
land
it?
40
Taking
acres,
us
to be
from
precise, for the
pre-European
actual town
settlement
site.
All the
Okay.
way up to
So by
1955.
1842,
Yeah,
it was
it
officially
covers a lot of
designated the
ground.
county
Everything
seat,
from
which
the
really
reign of
solidified
cotton,
its importance
the
for the
timber
region.
boom fueled by
And
those
then it
iron
was
horses,
formally
the
incorporated
growth
as a
of local
town in
industries,
1851.
and even, like you said, Camden's
town's name
unexpected
itself.
contribution to national security.
That has an interesting
Okay,
layer
so
to it, doesn't it?
let's kick things off
Wasn't
at the
always
beginning.
straightforward.
This
That's
location
right.
wasn't
Yeah,
just
for a
picked at
long time,
random,
the
was
origin
it?
of the
No,
name
not at all.
was
It had significance
debated
long
Right.
before the
discovery
first
in
European
2015
settlers arrived.
inside a
Definitely.
time capsule,
The
actually.
Camden site
It
was
brought greater
important long
clarity.
before European
The current
contact
understanding is that
because
Warren was
the
named in
Caddo
honor
Trace,
of Warren
this
Bradley,
established network
who
of
was an
trails
enslaved man
used by
owned by
indigenous
Hugh
groups
Bradley.
like the Caddo, Quapaw, and
that detail
Blackline cultures.
offers a powerful,
It crossed the
maybe
Ouachita River
sobering
and
insight
decided
into the
So
social
even
realities
then, it
back
was a
then.
It really does.
significant
A reflection of the
intersection
So,
for
okay,
travel
picture the scene.
and trade.
Brand new
A
county
natural
seat,
meeting point, it sounds
mid
like, then the
1800s
Europeans
South.
show up.
It wasn't
What's
always
the
known as
typical
Camden, was
layout?
it?
That's right.
Well,
the French
it followed a
initially
very
named
common
it
pattern in the
Écor
southern
Fabre.
Écor
states.
Fabre.
The
Yeah,
initial design
which
of
translates
Warren's
to
centered on a
Fabre's
public
Bluff,
square.
apparently
Right, for the
named
courthouse.
after an
Exactly.
early French
This wasn't
trader.
just any open
and this
space.
name,
It was
reflects the
specifically set
strategic
aside for the
importance they
courthouse.
saw in the bluff
That immediately
overlooking the
established the
Ouachita
square as
It's
the
a
focal point
natural
for
defensive
Civic
spot,
Life, a natural
key point
gathering
along the
place.
river.
So what about
Right.
the
We're
buildings?
talking
What would
about
that
the
square
era
have looked
of
like
early
in those
French
very early
exploration by
days?
figures
Well, the
like
very first
Marquette,
courthouse, built in
Joliet,
1842,
was
LaSalle,
basic,
really
claiming
temporary,
this territory
probably
for
logs
France.
or
And then we get a
simple
brief period
timber
of Spanish
framing.
influence.
Okay.
A little
It served its
international
purpose until
flavor
about
there.
1850.
Yes, briefly.
In
And the square
1782, the
around
Spanish
it,
governor sent
pretty
Don
modest,
Juan
more like a
Filiol to
clearing than
establish
the
a post
space
at
we see
Écor Fabre.
today.
Just a few buildings.
But
Just a
this
handful of
Spanish
simple wood
presence,
frame
it wasn't really
buildings,
sustained for very
general
long.
stores,
It's
maybe
a good
few
reminder that
professional
this region was
offices,
part of a
small
constantly
community
shifting
finding its
colonial
feet
landscape
Sounds
in North
very different.
America.
And then came a
Okay, so the
period that
Spanish
really
were there
tested
briefly.
the young town.
The French had a presence,
Reconstruction.
but it's the Americans
Yes,
who really
the Reconstruction
established
era
themselves.
after the Civil War
That's
was
when the name
particularly
changes to
tough for
Camden.
Warren.
Tell
Really
us about that
challenging.
transition. How
Right.
bad did it get?
So,
Well,
early 19th
historical
century saw
records
increasing
indicate that
numbers
at one
of
point
American
only a
settlers
single
arrived,
store
people
remained
like
open, just
Jesse
one.
Bowman and John
Wow.
Nunn.
And its business
Then,
was
in
mostly catering
1843,
to the
a
occupying
significant
federal
moment,
troops stationed there.
The settlement
Commercial
officially
activity
became
just
Camden when it
ground
was
to a
chosen as
halt,
the seat of the
really
newly
reflecting
formed
the
Wichita
broader
County.
Okay,
economic heart.
and why
But then,
Camden?
Well,
a big
the
change
name is
arrived.
believed to honor
Something
Camden,
that altered
Alabama.
Warren's
It
path.
seems to reflect the
Absolutely.
origins
The railroad.
of many of
The
these
arrival
early
of the
American
railroad in
settlers,
1880
including
was
a General Thomas
transformative,
Woodward
a
mentioned in
huge
the
event.
source.
so
Interesting.
Warren became
So
the
connection
western
back
terminus
east.
of the Little Rock,
Exactly.
Mississippi
And then it was
River and
later
Texas
incorporated as a
Railroad.
town.
This connection,
the source
finally
mentions
linking
either
Warren to
1844 or
broader
1849,
networks,
kind of
gave
solidifying
crucial
its
access
status
to
as a
the
municipality.
previously
It feels like more than
untapped
just a
timber
simple
market,
name swap, though,
and
doesn't
it was valuable.
The
So that
shift from
single
the French
piece of
infrastructure to the Anglo-American Camden
really lit an economic
suggests a
fire.
real
It certainly did.
turning of a
The
page.
1880s
Oh,
saw this
absolutely.
rapid expansion
As you said,
of the
it's
lumber
not just a
industry
change
nearby.
in label.
A significant significant
really
jump in the number of
signifies a
sawmills
major
around Warren.
Which means
cultural,
more people,
political,
more
and
business.
well,
Exactly. A surge in
demographic
population,
transformation.
people coming for
Acor
work,
fiber
and this
clearly
growth
ties
fueled
the
a
place
boom
to
in
its
commercial
early
activity,
French roots
all
and
centered around the
geography,
town
the
square.
bluff on the river.
So those
right.
early, simpler
The
wooden
Louisiana
buildings,
Purchase in 1803 opened the
These started to
door for
disappear.
American
Precisely.
settlement.
By the
and
1890s,
renaming it
most of
Camden,
those
a name
initial
with Southern
wood-frame
Anglo-American
structures
connections,
were replaced by
was,
more
a strong statement of a new
substantial,
cultural and administrative
enduring
order
brick
taking
commercial
Yeah, it really
blocks.
marks the shift.
So
that's
it
when
reflects
the
the
look really
changing
started changing.
population and the
Yeah, and it's
integration of
interesting,
this
the oldest
territory
surviving
into the
buildings we see
expanding
today
United States.
mostly date
The
back
very
to
act
this
of renaming
late
highlights
19th
how
century
place names
growth spurt.
themselves
Not
can embody
earlier.
shifts in
Suggests
power and
earlier
identity.
structures
Okay,
may
so let's
be
jump ahead
burned
of it.
down,
Camden transforms into this
deteriorated, or were
essential
just
river
replaced
port,
to reflect
earning
the
that
town's
Queen
growing
City title.
prosperity.
What
That
were
shift to
the
brick,
key ingredients for
it
that
signals
success?
Well, the big one
confidence,
was the
investment.
arrival of
And the
steamboats
layout of
in
the
the
square we'd
1820s.
recognize
That was
today.
the catalyst.
That's when did that really
Exactly.
cement itself?
Well, the
This new
fundamental
mode of
layout, the
transportation
footprint, was
directly
largely
connected
established by this
Camden to
late
the
19th
thriving
century
markets of
period.
New
Courthouse,
Orleans,
still central,
essentially
of course,
turning
Right.
it into a
Pines
vital
Block,
commercial artery.
bordered by Main Street to the
and
west,
Camden's
Myrtle
geographical
Street to the
advantage
east,
was
Cedar
huge.
Street
How
south.
so?
It
Coming
was
north.
basically
Immediately
at
north,
the
you had the
furthest
critical railroad
practical point of
tracks
steamboat
and the area
navigation
around
up the
Elm and
Wachito
First
River.
Streets.
That
Very
gave it a
important
significant
connection.
And
edge.
even the
Head of
street names
navigation,
around the
basically.
square.
Right.
They tell
That
stories
strategic
too, right?
location
They do
and the
indeed.
new tech
The streets
transformed
formed a
it from
grid,
just
and
a
as the
local
town
settlement
grew,
to a
many got
major
named
commercial
after
hub.
local
So it
landmarks.
wasn't just people coming and
Like
going.
Church
It was
Street.
the lifeblood
Exactly.
of the economy.
Church Street,
flowing
just south
in
of
and out on
Cedar,
those
gets
boats.
its name from the
Precisely.
churches nearby.
Steamboats brought in
The Methodist west
manufactured
of
goods
Maine,
and carried
the
out a
Baptist
massive amount of
further south
agricultural
on
products,
Maine.
primarily
And there
cotton.
used to be a
Cotton was king.
Presbyterian
Oh, yeah.
on Church
By the
Street itself.
1850s, Camden was
sense.
shipping
Even
an
the
astonishing
intersection
amount
of
up to
Maine and
40,000
Church
bales
became
of
a
cotton
key
each
crossroads.
year.
Wow.
It
Later
became a
on,
central
early
hub
20th
for
century, it had
processing and
multiple
then
filling
transporting this
stations,
crucial
you know,
commodity
as cars
to market
arrived.
downriver.
Okay, so the footprint
And Camden's importance wasn't
more
limited
substantial
to
brick
just
buildings
river
or
traffic,
up.
was it? I think
But
the
the
source
anchor,
mentioned
the
stagecoaches.
real heart,
Yes,
has always been
exactly.
the courthouse.
That was
Absolutely.
also a
The Bradley
significant
County
stagecoach
Courthouse.
hub.
It's the literal and
John T.
symbolic heart of
Chaister's
Warren's town
major
square.
stagecoach
A
line
testament to
actually had its
governance,
headquarters
community
there.
aspirations.
Really?
Yeah,
And it
providing
wasn't just one
essential
building over the
passenger
years.
and
No,
mail
what's interesting is
services
that the
throughout
central spot has
Arkansas,
housed three
Louisiana,
different courthouses,
Texas,
each reflecting
and
its own
crucially,
era.
it even
Tell me about
carried
them. We
U.S.
heard about the
mail
first temporary
for
one.
the
What came next?
Butterfield
In
Overland
1858,
mail
they
route.
started
The
construction on a
Butterfield
more
was the big
permanent
one, right?
brick
Connecting
courthouse.
east and west.
Two
That's the
stories.
one, a
It was
major
finished around
transcontinental
1861 or
connection.
62.
So that
Right
really
as the Civil
highlights
War was starting.
Camden's
Exactly.
strategic position.
That
in,
building served for
national
several
communication
decades,
networks,
saw a
too.
lot of change
So you've got
before
this
being
bustling
replaced near the end
riverfront.
of the 19th century.
So as
Steamboats,
Warren's fortunes
stagecoaches
improved with
constantly
timber,
arriving and
they
departing.
wanted something
There must have been some
grander.
serious infrastructure there to
Turn of
handle
the
all that
20th
activity.
century,
For sure.
fueled
The
by
sources
that lumber
mention
money,
wharfs along
Bradley
the river
County
to accommodate the
decided to
steamboats.
invest.
And, you know,
Bigger,
the enthusiastic
more
welcome given to
architecturally
vessels
significant.
like
And
the
that's
city
the
of
one
Camden in
standing today.
That's the
1893
one.
really
The
paints a
current
vivid
Bradley County
picture of a
Courthouse,
lively
built in
port.
Yeah, you can
1903.
imagine the excitement.
Designed
And while
by
our source
Frank
doesn't
W.
give like
A
super
prominent
detailed
Arkansas
descriptions
architect,
of the
Very
early
much so.
warehouses,
Known for his
we
civic
know that
buildings.
Frenchport
And
Landing,
deciding
further
to build such a
downriver,
grand
had a
structure
substantial
really
big
speaks
warehouse
volumes
for
about
cotton.
the town's
So it's
wealth and
highly likely
optimism
that
then.
Camden,
And it's quite a
being
building
an
to
even
look
more
at. What's the
significant
style?
port,
It is
would have had
monumental.
similar,
Two-story brick,
if not
blending
larger
classical and
facilities.
Romanesque revival
Interestingly,
elements.
the source mentions
Styles
the
often
Sanborn
chosen
fire
for public
insurance maps from
buildings, you know, to
1924.
permanence,
Those maps
importance.
are
So you can picture it.
incredible
Distinctive
resources.
features.
It's got
Why
this
is that?
two-tone brickwork,
Well,
several
they were
towers.
created for
the most
fire
prominent
insurance
is that
purposes, so they
stately,
detail the
four-sided
layout and
clock
construction
tower
of
at the
buildings,
southwest
like
corner.
footprints,
clock tower,
materials used.
Topped with an elegant
They
bell
offer really
cupola
valuable
and a
insights
finial.
into urban
Makes it
development,
really visible from all
so
around the
those
square.
maps could give us a
Landmark.
much more
Gibbs'
detailed
design
look at the
sounds
layout
very
of that
deliberate.
early riverfront.
What are some other
That's a great
key
tip for
features?
local historians.
Well, Gibbs'
So it
design
was
has
really
a
a
central block,
combination of
flanked by
factors that
symmetrical
led to
wings.
Camden's
It's
success
balanced by the
as
main clock
the
tower
Queen
and a
City,
slightly
wasn't it?
shorter
Absolutely.
tower
You
on
have
the
the
other
navigable
side.
river, the
Creates
fertile
this
land
formal
perfect for growing
grandeur.
And the
cotton.
entrance.
The
And
main
then the
entrance has a
development of the
welcoming
necessary
one-story
infrastructure,
portico
wharfs,
supported by Tuscan
warehouses,
columns.
stage lines,
Nice
and
classical
a strong
detail adds
entrepreneurial
to the
spirit
dignified
to
look.
capitalize on it
And
all.
throughout,
as
you
is
see
often the
decorative
case,
touches,
things
brick
don't stay
coins at the
static.
corners,
The river's
arched windows on the
dominance
second
eventually
story,
gives way
all
to
very
a new
refined.
form of transportation.
And this
Right.
particular courthouse.
Indeed.
It's
While
significant in
cotton
Gibbs'
remained
work.
an important part
The
of the economy,
1903 Bradley County
particularly
Courthouse
with the
is
rise
seen
of
as an
sharecropping
early
after
and
the Civil
particularly
War.
ornate
Which was its own
example of this
complex
classic
system.
Oh, definitely. A
influenced
system
designs
which
for
often
civic
kept
buildings.
formerly enslaved
Really
people
reflects
in
the
cycles
confidence
of
of a
debt
community
through a form of
booming
tenant
thanks to timber.
farming.
The ambition shows.
And the arrival of
Definitely.
railroads
Including a
provided an
prominent
additional
clock
means of
tower,
transport
such
for cotton.
refined
Right.
details.
But the late
It symbolized
19th and
Warren's
early
optimism.
20th century
It
saw
hopes
this
for future
massive
growth
boom
fueled by
in the
lumber.
timber
And it's
industry
amazing it's so well
in
preserved and
Ouachita
still in
County.
use.
As the
Speaks
19th century
volumes.
progressed,
Absolutely.
the dominance
Remarkably
of the river
well
began to be
maintained for
challenged
over
by
120
the railroad.
years.
And the railroads were the
Survived
key
without
to
major
unlocking that
disasters,
timber wealth.
Still serves its
Exactly.
original
The
function.
arrival
Any
of
changes?
major rail
Alterations
lines
have
like
been
the St.
sympathetic.
Louis, Iron Mountain,
There
and
was a
Southern, which
compatible
later became
two-story
Missouri
addition
Pacific.
added
Okay.
to the rear
The St.
in
Louis
2003,
Southwestern, known as the
for
Cotton Belt.
functionality.
Right, the cotton belt.
But
and
it
the
didn't
Chicago,
compromise
Rock
the
Island, and
historical
Pacific,
integrity.
or the
And
Rock
the grounds
Island.
themselves.
They arrived in the
More than just
1880s and
grass,
early
right?
1900s.
Oh, certainly.
And that
the
changed
courthouse
everything
and its
for
grounds
timber.
have long been a
Completely.
vital
It made
community
previously
gathering space.
inaccessible,
The
vast
lawn has
timber
monuments,
resources, economically
historical
viable
markers.
to
Like what?
extract and
There's a
transport.
1936
Camden
Arkansas
became a
Centennial
major
marker
hub for this
commemorating
trade,
the site
with
of the
numerous
first
lumber
courthouse,
companies
the early
established publishing
history.
operations.
It sounds like a
Tangible
mutually
reminders.
beneficial
And there's another historic
relationship.
building
It
right
really
next door.
was.
Yes.
The
Just east of
railroads
the
made
main
timber
courthouse.
for their own
A charming
infrastructure ties
one-story
storage
brick
fuel
building
sometimes.
built in
And the timber
1890.
industry
What was it originally?
absolutely
Housed
depended
the
on the
county
railroads
clerk's
to
office.
move their
Back
products to
then,
market
before big
efficiently.
annexes,
So it really
a
shows how
fireproof structure like
technology,
this was
like
crucial for
railroads,
safeguarding records.
can
And
just
now?
unlock
It's been repurposed
resources
as a
and
local
reshape
library,
whole
still serving the
regional
community,
economies.
and it
Precisely.
visually frames
So
the east side
the
of the
economic
square.
base begins
So
to
those two
broaden.
buildings, the courthouse and
It's
the old
not
clerk's
solely
office,
reliant on cotton
they
anymore.
really
Were
anchor
there
the
other
square
industries starting to take root
They do.
around this time?
Both are
or
on the
even
National
earlier?
Register
Yes,
of Historic
definitely.
Places, listed back
There
in
was some cloth
76.
manufacturing in
And they're
Camden
key
even before
elements
the
within
Civil
the
War,
Warren
which is
Commercial
interesting.
Historic District,
And the
which
Camden
covers
Foundry
about
Company was
20
established
acres
back in the
downtown.
1850s.
Okay, we've got the
What do they
centerpiece
make?
courthouse.
Initially,
What about the
agricultural
other buildings
implements,
that
tools
grew
for
up around
farming,
the square?
but later,
How
during
did
the
their
Civil
look
War, they
change over
actually
time?
manufactured
Big
artillery for
transformation
the
there.
Confederacy.
Wow,
Mid-1800s,
okay, so some early
mostly
industrial
simple frame
capacity there.
storefronts.
Yeah.
Functional.
And then Camden
Right.
became the
But
birthplace
as
of some
the
pretty
town
well-known local
prospered,
brands later
especially
on,
after the
didn't they?
railroad,
That's right.
those
What's
got replaced.
fascinating here is
More
the emergence of
substantial
these
brick commercial
nationally
blocks came
recognized
in.
when
What
was
big
manufacturers in the
shift?
early 20th
Mostly
century.
between about
Yeah.
You had
1895
Camargue
and
pottery.
1925.
Oh, yeah, the
if you walked
pottery.
around
Founded
there,
around
you'd see mostly
1926,
1- and
which
2-story brick
produced
buildings,
really
often
distinctive
with
and
decorative
collectible
cornices,
art pottery.
big display
People
windows,
still seek it out
late
today.
Victorian,
And of course,
early
the briquette
20th
bottling
century
plant.
commercial style.
Also founded
Reflecting
in
that
1926,
growing stability.
which
Exactly,
gave
a
us
sense
the,
of permanence,
the much-loved
economic
briquette
strength
soft drink.
in Warren.
Developed a
Can
bit
you
later,
give us a few
by
specific
1939,
examples?
but the plant
What
started
kind of
earlier.
businesses
A
were in these
distinct
new brick
flavor of
buildings?
that one.
It
Sure.
really was.
Along the west
Then,
side of
in
Main Street,
1927,
several notable ones
major
went up
long-term
around the
player
turn of the
arrived.
century.
The International
One of the
Paper
oldest
Company.
survivors,
IP,
103 N
that was
Main,
huge.
Yeah,
is
their
from about
mill became a
1905.
cornerstone of Camden's
Housed
economy
various
for
things over the
many,
years,
many
dry
decades.
goods,
Provided
clothing,
stable employment
eventually
for
a
lot of
print
people.
shop.
Right.
Okay.
Right
And the
next door,
sources also
105
indicate,
Main,
you know,
Main, two
a
stories,
wide range of other
built around
early
1915.
businesses existed.
That was
in
Ganaway's
Camden
Druggist
Drugstore for a long
Hotels,
time on
banks,
the ground floor,
mercantiles,
with
showcasing a
offices
really
or
diverse
apartments
commercial
upstairs.
landscape
common
even
set.
then. Very
And what about
common.
the oil
Further
boom?
down at 109
South
Main, you
Arkansas had that
Hurley's
big
Hardware
boom in the
around
1920s,
1910,
centered around
catering to
El
the
Dorado.
growing town.
Did
Then mixed
Camden
in,
feel
you know,
any of that
barber
energy?
shops,
It did,
bakeries, other
yeah.
specialty shops.
While
And the
Camden
banks,
didn't
where did they
become
fit
a
in? Usually
primary
prime
oil
spots.
production center like
They
El
definitely
Dorado,
picked prime spots
it
near
certainly
the square,
benefited from the
recognized its
regional
commercial
boom.
importance.
How so?
Merchants and
Well, there
Planters
was
Bank,
some oil
Warren Bank,
production
both
in
founded around the
areas
turn of the
within
century.
Wachita
Any
County,
particular
like
corner
down
become
near
a banking
Stevens,
hub?
and
Yeah,
even
the
a small
southwest
amount
corner
near
of Main
Camden
Cedar,
itself.
that really emerged
But
as one.
probably
Early on,
more
First National
importantly,
Bank
the
had a
overall
stately
economic
neoclassical
activity
building there,
generated in the
2 stories,
region, and right next to
likely
it was the
increased
Warren
demand
Bank.
for
In that
goods
corner.
and
It
services
saw
in
some
Camden,
changes,
you
too,
know, giving a boost to
architecturally.
its existing
Yes, it did.
businesses.
A ripple
In
effect.
1927, a
Exactly.
Now,
fire
amidst
sadly
all this
destroyed the
economic
original
development,
Warren
this
Bank
growth and
building.
change,
no.
But a
Camden found
new,
itself in a really
architecturally
significant and
significant bank was
challenging
built
period.
right on
Yeah.
that
The
same
Civil
prominent
War.
site.
It wasn't spared from
That's
that
the building
conflict,
now
was it?
No,
known
not
as
at
the
all.
first
Camden's
state
strategic
building.
importance
What
as a
style is that one?
riverport and a key
Impressive
transportation
classical
hub
revival
made it a
style. You see
significant
prominent
location for the
blasters, a
Confederacy.
formal
So they
pediment, even a
fortified it.
carved
They
eagle.
did. They
Really
established
embodies that
fortifications like
1920s
Fort
small town
Lookout
prosperity
and the Camden
pride.
Water
It's a little
Battery
landmark
to
then.
protect it.
Definitely.
Especially
Changed
river
names
access.
and owners over the decades.
While these new
but the
industries
building
were
itself
emerging,
remains
Camden
a
had
key
already
architectural piece on
experienced
the
this
square.
major
So
turning
the
point
courthouse
in its
and
And
the
it became a
later bank
central
building
point in
really
a
stand
major
out. What about
Union
the other
campaign
sides?
later in the war?
Cedar Street,
Yes,
Myrtle
in
Street.
Okay.
1864,
South
the
side,
Union's Red
along
River
Cedar
campaign
Street.
included
One of the
something
most
called
notable
the Camden
structures was the
Expedition,
Southern Hotel,
led by General
originally the
Steele.
Sutherland
And they
Hotel.
actually
took the town.
When was that
Yeah,
built?
Union
Around
forces
1910,
occupied Camden
southwest
for a
corner
period.
of Cedar and
However,
Myrtle,
the surrounding area
substantial
saw
three-story
intense
brick
fighting.
hotel
Quickly
including
became
the
a
tragic
central
Battle of
social hub.
Poison
Travelers,
Spring.
What happened
locals.
there?
It was
Place.
essentially a
75
massacre
guest
of black
rooms,
Union
full
soldiers
restaurant,
after they were
barbershop,
captured or
and
surrendered.
supposedly
A
the town's
horrific
very
event.
first elevator.
And there was
Local lore
also
says
a
maybe only
significant
one
Union
other
defeat
private
at
one in
Mark's
town at the
Mills,
time.
where
Quite
Confederate
something.
forces
What
captured a
happened to it?
large supply
Sadly,
train.
the
So
Southern
setbacks for the
Hotel,
Union.
Warren's
big
main
setbacks,
hotel for
it
decades,
ultimately forced
was
General
destroyed
Steele
by
and his
fire in
forces to abandon
1964,
Camden and were street
left
back
a
to Little
noticeable
Rock.
gap.
A deeply
It's a
difficult
parking
and
lot
violent
now.
time, no doubt.
That's a shame.
Following that
It's changed the
upheaval,
feel of that corner.
Camden,
What
like
other
the rest of
businesses
the
around
South,
Cedar?
entered
Nearby were some
reconstruction,
important stores.
trying to rebuild
Calvin's
and
General
redefine its
Store
society.
occupied two
Did
brick
Camden play a
storefronts
role
from
in those
around
reconstruction
1905.
efforts?
Absolutely.
Groceries on
the
one
source
side,
mentions
dry
the
goods on the
Leakingham
other.
A
building.
real general store.
It was
Right.
repurposed as an
By the
office for
1920s,
Freedmen's
it had
Bureau
evolved
in
into the
1865.
J.T.
Tell us
Edrington
about the
Department
Freedmen's
Store.
Bureau. What was
Major
their role?
local retailer.
Well, it was
Okay.
a federal agency
Also on
set up
Cedar
right
was
after the
Bailey's
Civil War
drugstore,
to
built around
assist,
1910.
formerly
Later housed
enslaved
the popular
people,
sandwich
and
shop
really
cafe,
to oversee
even
the
a doctor's
transition to
office
freedom
upstairs.
across
Multi-use
the South.
buildings. What
Very
kind of
much so.
assistance?
And next to
All
it
sorts
was
of
Hankins
Vital
and
Aid,
Sons
rations,
hardware from about 1905,
clothing, establishing schools,
stocked
which
everything
was
farm
huge,
implements,
overseeing
household
labor
goods,
contracts
even had a
to try
5
and
and dime
ensure fashion in
section,
the 20s.
and even helping
Shows the
families
variety right
reunite
there on
after the
square.
terrible
So by the
disruptions of
mid-20th century,
slavery.
the
That
square
sounds
was
incredibly
really
important.
a
was
one-stop
crucial
shop for
work.
the community.
And their
Totally
records,
self-sufficient.
many of which are preserved in the National Archives,
By then,
offer
Warren's
just
town square had
invaluable
it all.
insights into
Multiple
this really
drugstores,
complex period.
doctors'
And a really
offices, at
important
least
step
two
forward in
big
education
hardware
for
and farm
African
implement
Americans took
dealers.
place right there in
clothing shops
Camden
like
during this time.
Glasgow's and
Indeed.
Spots on Main.
The Freedmen's Bureau
cafes,
established
bakeries,
Lincoln High School
furniture,
in
appliances,
1870.
professional offices.
1870, so
everything
pretty
clustered
early in
conveniently
Reconstruction.
around the
Yeah.
courthouse.
This was the
Undeniably
very
heart
first
of the
school
town's
for Black
economy.
students in
It's clear as
Camden.
the commercial
And a
heart, but it's
crucial
also the
development
center
in
of
providing
social and
educational
civic life, right?
opportunities that had been
From
systematically
Warren's
denied under
earliest
slavery.
days, the
A
town
huge
square
step.
was the
It
primary
really represented a
gathering place.
significant step
And
towards
following that
educational
common
equity
tradition in
community at
Arkansas
that time.
courthouse
Okay, so
towns, it
the
also
river era's
functioned as the
importance
central public
diminishes.
forum.
The railroads
So
bring
political
this
rallies,
new wave
speeches.
of growth,
Oh, yes.
particularly timber.
Candidates
and then the
regularly
20th
held
century
speeches right on the
arrives.
courthouse steps.
Camden
Drew
continues to
residents from
transform,
all over the
and it's
county,
the
especially
railroads
on
that
court
really take
days or
center
election
stage now
eves.
in
The
shaping
place to
its
hear the latest
development,
news,
That's
engage
right.
in debate.
The arrival
Yes,
of those major rail
definitely.
lines,
In the
Iron
19th
Mountain,
century,
Cotton Belt,
important
the
news
Rock
elections
Island,
in
and
the
Civil
late
War
19th
updates would
and
be
early
posted
20th
or
centuries
proclaimed right there
really
at the square.
solidify the
This
information
shift.
hub.
Entering
Railroads became the
Reconstruction.
dominant
Its role
mode
as
of
a seat of
transportation for
authority
both
was
goods
underlined.
and people.
Union
Overtaking
troops
the
were
river.
stationed
Yeah,
in
effectively
Warren,
challenging
likely
the
used
long-standing
courthouse
supremacy
area
as
of the Waukita
headquarters.
River.
And that
It fundamentally
tradition of
altered
the
Camden's
square
economic
as the
landscape
community
by
focal
providing
point.
these reliable,
It
efficient,
carried right on into
all-weather
the 20th
transport
century.
links. It certainly
these
did.
railroads
Remained
didn't just
central for
move
public
goods.
celebrations,
They also
civic
reshaped
pride
the physical
displays,
layout
parades
and
became a
sort of
regular
the
thing.
social
Kind of
hubs of the
parades.
town itself.
Annual
didn't they?
Warren
With
High
those
School
impressive
homecoming
depot
parades.
buildings.
Exactly
Big
right.
4th of
These
July
railway
depots
depots
were
were more than
Veterans
just
Day
functional
processions.
buildings. They
They all
became
went
new
around the
focal
square,
points for
used its
commercial
open
and
space,
social
the courthouse
activity.
steps as a
They
natural
gradually
reviewing
shifted the
stand.
town's
And
center of
wartime
gravity
gatherings.
away
Yes,
from the
we even have
riverfront,
these
which had been
poignant
the heart
photos
for
from
so
World
long.
War I and
Can you
II.
tell us about the
The
depots
community gathered
themselves?
downtown for
Well, the
send-offs,
Missouri Pacific
and the
Depot,
joyous
built around
homecoming for local
1917,
soldiers,
is
The
noted
courthouse
for
grounds
its
themselves played a
Mediterranean
role in
revival
wartime efforts,
architectural
too.
style.
They did.
What does that look like?
During World War
Think
II, the
arched
grounds often
windows,
hosted
stucco
vital war bond
exteriors, maybe
rallies,
tile
people gathered
roofs.
to hear speeches,
It was a
buy
significant
bonds.
structure that served
Sometimes
both
military
passenger
vehicles
and
were
freight
displayed right there
traffic.
to rally
Okay.
support. Now, our
And then
source
there's the
provides
really
less detailed
enduring
information about
tradition,
the Camden
the
Cotton
one
Belt
Warren is
Depot,
famous
but if
for.
you look at similar depots
yes.
along that line, like the one in
The
Fordyce,
Bradley
it
County
suggests
Pink Tomato
maybe a red
Festival,
brick building,
a beloved
possibly also
annual
with
event since the
Mediterranean or perhaps
1950s.
craftsman
The pink tomato
influences.
capital of
They
the
often
world.
That's
featured
the
a
title.
prominent
And every
operator's bay
June,
window.
thousands
Right,
of
where the
people
telegraph
descend on
operator
Warren
would
for
be.
the festival.
Exactly.
Events are
And
heavily
while specific
concentrated right
architectural
in and
details
around
for
the
the
town
Rock Island
square.
Depot and
Sounds like
Camden
quite the
aren't
party.
abundant
It
in
truly
our source.
is. Lively
Other Rock
parade,
Island depots
fun
built in
tomato
Arkansas
eating
during that
contests,
era
live
often
music,
incorporated
a
craftsman
bustling street
elements,
fair.
emphasis
It
on
basically
natural
takes over the
materials,
square and
exposed
adjacent
structural
streets.
elements,
How long has it been going?
handcrafted
It's one of the
details.
So these
oldest
buildings
continuous
were
festivals
statements
in
in themselves.
Arkansas.
For
Dates
sure.
back to
They
around
really
1956,
symbolized
deeply
Camden's
ingrained
growing
in the
connection
local
to the wider
identity.
world
So
and
the square
became
just
these
comes
new
alive then.
gateways to the
Absolutely.
community.
Normally
So we've
quiet streets
explored
filled
the
with
economic
vendors,
shifts,
huge
the infrastructure
crowds.
developments.
Yeah.
Locals,
But what about
visitors,
the
even
people,
political
the
candidates
society,
show up,
the
shake
culture of
hands, maybe
Camden
join the
during this
parade.
period, say from
Still a political
1800
stage.
up to
But it's used for other
1955.
things too, not just the
It's
festival.
clearly
Oh,
a
yes.
complex picture,
Community
especially when we
remembrance,
consider
civic
the
observances,
experiences of the African
memorial
American
services,
community.
Veterans
It is indeed
Day,
a
National
complex
Day of
picture
Prayer,
marked
often
by
held on the
both,
courthouse
immense
lawn.
challenges
And Christmas on the
remarkable
square
resilience.
brings
The
festive
history of
decorations,
African Americans in
gatherings,
Camden
keeps
during
that
this time
community
is
spirit alive.
deeply
And in
intertwined with
tougher
the broader
times,
history of the
crises.
South.
Yes,
the antebellum
unfortunately,
period
Warren
was
faced
defined by
disasters,
slavery, which was the
devastating
foundation of that
tornadoes in
cotton-based
1949
economy.
and 1975.
The
And the
Reconstruction
squares roll
era,
then.
as we
In those
discussed,
difficult
offered
times,
a
it
brief
served
window
as a
of
vital
opportunity and
central
progress,
coordination
symbolized
point
by
for
the work
relief
of the
efforts.
Freedmen's Bureau.
A space for
But
the
that
community
window
to come
closed.
together,
It
grieve,
did. It was
support
followed by
each
the
other.
rise of the Jim Crow
That open
South,
layout
which brought
just
segregation,
naturally facilitates
disenfranchisement,
gathering
and
celebration
violence.
and tragedy.
Tragically,
fascinating how
this
the
is evidenced
square's
by
activity
documented
level
lynchings in
mirrors
Camden,
Warren's
mentioned in the
economic
source, one in 1890
Let's dig into
and
the
another in
timber industry first. That
1925.
was huge.
Horrific
Undeniably
acts.
the
Yeah.
driving force.
But despite
Late
these
19th,
incredibly
early
oppressive
20th centuries,
conditions,
and the
the
town
African
square
American
was its
community in
absolutely
Camden
vital
demonstrated
commercial and service
incredible
center.
strength
Kicked
in
off by the
building their
railroad.
own
Exactly.
institutions
That
and communities.
1880
Education
arrival
was
the
clearly a
catalyst.
central focus,
spurred
wasn't it?
huge
Lincoln High
investment
School
in
stands as a
large-scale
powerful
sawmills
example.
nearby.
Absolutely.
Local money
Established in
outside money.
1870
And
by
those
the
mills,
Freedmen's Bureau,
they
Lincoln
changed
High School
everything.
served the African
Transformative
American American
impact.
community in Camden
Mills like
for a
Bradley
century.
Lumber, Southern Lumber
100
employed
years,
hundreds.
providing vital
Warren's
educational
population exploded,
That's
and
incredible
businesses
longevity.
around the
It
square
is.
thrive,
And its
meeting the
legacy
needs
is
of all these
honored
new
and
people.
preserved
I've been
today through a
buzzing.
museum located
The
at the site.
1920s, 30s,
Later,
peak
in
lumber
1928,
years, Warren's Square
Lafayette
was
School was
reportedly
founded.
bustling 6
And this
days
was
a
with
week.
support
A
from
real
the
hive
Rosenwald
of activity.
Fund.
Absolutely.
The
Loggers,
Rosenwald Schools.
mill
That was a
workers,
major initiative
they'd
across
come
the
to
South.
town, especially
Huge.
Saturdays
A
after
philanthropic
payday, do their
effort that
banking right
supported
there
the
on
construction of
square,
schools for
buy
African-American
supplies,
children.
relax, socialize.
Lafayette
And the
School grew
banks
to
played
offer
a
a
key
full
role.
12-grade
Critical role.
education,
Provided financing
including
for the
vocational
lumber
training.
operations.
And its
Merchants
gymnasium
sold
became
everything
a really
workers needed:
significant
boots,
community gathering
tools,
place.
household
church.
goods for families.
That must have played
Which
an
banks were
indispensable role
prominent then,
as it
Merchants
so often
and Planters
did within
Bank started in
African-American
the
communities across the
1890s,
South.
and
Oh,
Warren
undoubtedly.
Bank founded
While our
1901.
source doesn't provide
Both grew
extensive detail on
significantly during the
specific
timber boom,
African-American
still
churches
among
in
the town's
Camden
oldest
before
businesses.
And
1955.
even that impressive 1903
Historically,
courthouse
denominations like the African
connected to
Methodist
the Timberwolf.
Episcopal,
Directly
the
enabled by
AME
it,
Church,
yeah.
and various Baptist
Entrepreneurs,
churches were
many
central
from the
pillars
Midwest,
of the
came to
community.
capitalize
More than
on
just
the pine
places of
forests.
worship.
Much
Brought
more.
significant
They
new
were hubs
capital
for
to Bradley
social
County,
organization,
made such an
mutual
ambitious
support
civic network,
networks, places for
The
community
railroad's
building,
location, right
and
near the
often
square,
became
must have been
centers for
crucial
activism
too.
in the fight for
crucial.
civil rights.
Tracks ran just
The
a block
AME
north.
Church, in
Vitally.
particular, has a
By
long and
1912, the
significant
area
history
between
of
First
involvement
Street
in
and the
education.
tracks was
So
full of
vital
big grocery
institution.
and furniture
Absolutely.
warehouses.
And
Serving the
local
lumber trade.
archives and community
companies
histories
like
would likely
Saline
hold a
Grocer,
wealth of
Turner
information
Jones,
about the specific
wholesale
histories and
grocery,
contributions of these
supplying local
congregations
stores,
in Camden.
lumber camps,
Something for further
very
research.
efficient.
And
the trains
despite
themselves
facing
Carried
these systemic
vast
barriers
quantities
and
of lumber out
discrimination,
to national markets
numerous
and brought all sorts
remarkable
of goods in,
individuals emerged
offloaded right
who
near the
made
square's
lasting
northern
contributions
edge.
to the community.
Solidified the square's
source
role as a
mentions
regional
several.
distribution
Yes,
hub.
it does.
And even
We
when
see
timber started
inspiring
to decline
figures
a
like
bit,
John Monroe
the square
Bowie.
adapted.
He
They
rose
did.
from
After
enslavement to become a
WWWI,
successful
as the big
businessman,
forests were
investor,
logged
and a
out and
generous
mills slowed down.
philanthropist. Timber
The
was
Bowie
still
homes in
important,
Camden
just
are actually
maybe
named
not
in
the
his
explosive
honor.
growth
Amazing
phase.
story.
It
Potlatch
really is.
Corporation
Then
took
there's
over
Beulah
Southern
Ivory
Lumber,
in the
another
50s.
significant figure.
So the
A
banks and
highly
stores
respected
adjusted.
educator
Yeah, the
and
established
civic
banks,
leader for whom
supply
Ivory
stores,
Heights
they
is named.
adapted
Okay.
to a
And
steadier
Dr. Everett
wood
Allen
products
Clark.
economy.
He was a
Still
pioneering
key
figure,
players.
the
Then,
second African
mid-20th
American
century,
physician
another
to
big
practice
industry
in Camden.
emerges.
He was also
Tomatoes.
a teacher,
That's
a
right.
civic leader,
Mid-20th
and even
century
served as
tomato
president of the
agriculture
local
becomes
chapter
Bradley
of the
County's
National
other
Negro
signature
Business
industry.
League.
And the
Ivor
town
Clark
square
Park is
again
named for
adapts
him.
to the seasonal
Wow,
rhythms of this
multi-talented
new
leaders.
economic
Truly.
engine.
What made the area
And
good
we
for
should also
tomatoes?
remember
The soil.
individuals the source mentions.
The county's unique
like
sandy
Porter
loam
Bennett,
soil,
a dedicated
proved
youth baseball
exceptionally well
volunteer.
suited for cultivating
Ida
these
B. Moore,
renowned South
often referred to
Arkansas
as the
vine-ripe
mother
pink
of Ivor
tomatoes.
Clark Park,
Got a
for her
reputation
community
for
work.
amazing flavor.
And Mildred
And the
McKinney,
annual
a
harvest
respected
must have brought a
educator,
totally different
church
energy.
leader.
Oh, absolutely.
And how every summer
It shows a vibrant
peak harvest
community life
May,
despite the
June,
obstacles.
downtown
Absolutely.
Warren would be
And the
buzzing.
existence of
Farm
organizations
trucks
like the
loaded with
Parent-Teacher
tomatoes,
Association at
agricultural
Lafayette
workers
School
coming in.
and
Where
that
did the
local
tomatoes
chapter
go?
of the
Growers
National
brought
Negro
them into
Business
town,
League just
sold to
underscores the
brokers, or
community's
loaded onto
commitment
rail
to
cars for
self-improvement
shipment
and
across the
collective
country.
progress.
What about the
Longtime
development
residents
of
remember
education
Campbell's
for
soup
white
being a
students
huge
during this
buyer
period?
back in
Well,
the 50s.
we see evidence of
Trucks
early
constantly
schools
coming and
established
going.
relatively
How did the
soon
square's
after
businesses
Camden's
cater to
founding.
this?
Records
They definitely
indicate
benefited.
seven white
Cafes
teachers in
opened
the area
early
by
for
1888,
pickers,
hardware
according to
stores,
Goodspeed's
stocked
historical
freights and
account.
tools.
The first
Banks offered
dedicated
credit to
county high
growers
school
waiting
building
for
was
payment.
constructed in
Sounds lively.
1871.
It was. Height of the season.
Now, while
the
our
square
source
had a
doesn't
real
offer as much
carnival feel.
detail on female
Mountains of
academies
tomatoes piled on
specifically in
sidewalks for
Camden
weighing,
compared to maybe
kids
some
having
nearby
playful
towns,
tomato fights
it's
sometimes.
reasonable to assume they
real
likely
scene.
And this
existed,
tomato boom
given how
directly
prevalent
led to
such
that iconic
institutions
festival.
were in the region.
Exactly.
We
Recognizing
do know
the
of
economic
individuals
and
like Mary
cultural
Connolly,
importance,
who
the
taught
town
in
launched the
Camden.
Bradley County
And further
Pink Tomato
highlighting the
Festival.
development, Matt
Draws
Hawley Academy,
huge crowds
chartered way
every
back
year,
in
as we said.
1847,
And the square is
was
ground
located
zero
near
for that.
Camden.
Totally. Festival
Later
week,
in
the whole region's
1925, the
economic
Fairview
and
School
social
District
life
was
centers
formed,
on Warren
and they
Square.
built a
Streets
pretty
closed,
modern
lined with
six-room
vendors.
schoolhouse,
You
complete
even
with
see
an
that
auditorium.
giant painted tomato
Notably,
on the
they
bricks
became the
at a
first
key
rural
intersection.
district
A
in the
real
county to
symbol.
offer a
Mhm.
physical education
The courthouse
program.
lawn becomes a
Interesting. So
picnic
gradual
area for
development
tomato
there, too. And-
luncheons.
Yeah.
And Camden's growth and
Showcasing all
character
the
were
ways
also
to use
shaped
them.
by its
Clearly
civic
a
leaders
huge
and
point of
prominent
pride.
families,
It
right?
is
Absolutely.
indeed. You have the
So
early
much so
settler
that in
families like the Tates
1987,
and Nuns
the
playing a
Arkansas General
foundational role.
Assembly made
Peter
the pink
McCollum's
tomato the
impressive
official
Greek
state
revival
fruit.
home built around 1847.
Really underscores how
revival, okay.
tied
Yeah, that
together
became
the
an
crop
early
and
symbol of
Warren's
prosperity
identity,
in
and it
the
was
art.
later
And it still
associated with
matters
Colonel
today.
John T.
Yeah,
Chellister.
even with changes in
stagecoach
farming,
guy.
lots of
The very
locals still get
same.
seasonal
His
work in
extensive
tomato
stagecoach
packing and
empire
shipping.
was
And the
headquartered
square
in
remains
Camden,
the venue for the
and the house
farmers
is often
market
referred
and
to
the
now
annual
as the
festival,
McCollum Chichester
linking the modern
House.
economy right
landmark.
back to those
Definitely.
agricultural roots.
Later on, you
mentioned the
have
preserved
merchant
brick streets
families like the
earlier. They
Bergs,
tie into this,
Emberg,
too.
Mercantile, and
Those red
Leoberg
brick
served as
streets
mayor in the
downtown,
1920s.
many paved around
They contributed
1927
significantly
during a
to the
good
town's
period.
economic life.
They add historical
Gaughan law
charm,
firm,
sure,
which
but
included
they often
figures
have
like
those
Maud
painted pink
Crawford,
tomato
played a role in the
motifs,
legal and civic
reinforces
landscape.
that identity.
And
Beyond
Matthew
timber and
Herman
tomatoes, the
Rother
square
Sr.,
also
founder of
reflects
the
other
Camden
developments,
Furniture
like
Company,
basic
is even
infrastructure.
credited with helping
Absolutely. As
popularize
the
the
county
motto,
seat, Warren
"In
got
God We
essential
Trust,"
public
on
utilities
currency.
relatively
Really?
early.
That's
By the
quite a claim to fame.
1920s, the
It
local
is,
light
and
and water
Camden
company
also
had
produced
offices
some
just
notable
off the
figures
square
who
on
rose
Cedar.
to
Shows
prominence
these
in
services
state
growing.
politics.
And
See
city
what I
government
got.
buildings.
Right.
Well, Governor
The
George
city's
Washington
municipal
Hayes,
building,
he
constructed
was
in
born in
1931
Camden
on the
and
east
served as
side,
Wachita County
104
judge
and
before
Myrtle,
becoming governor
brought
from
together City
1913 to
Hall,
1917.
police,
Okay.
fire stations,
Similarly,
even the Chamber of
Governor
Commerce.
Benjamin Travis Leamy
Impressive Art
Jr. was a
Deco
native of
style,
Wachita
distinctive
County and
concrete
served as
ornaments,
Camden's
a sign
mayor
of
from
progress.
1935
And the rise
to
of the car,
1939
that left
before
its
his
mark, too.
governorship
Oh,
from
yes.
1945
More
to
cars meant
1949.
gas
So
stations
two
popping up on
governors
the
with
square's
strong Camden
periphery.
ties.
Mid-20th
And of course,
century,
Senator
Main
John
and
L.
Church
McClellan,
intersection was packed with them.
though
Big
not born
brands.
there,
Yeah, Lion
he
Oil,
moved to
Esso,
Camden and
Mobile,
launched his
almost every
long and
corner.
very
Serving
influential
locals,
career
but
in
also
the U.S.
travelers
Senate
on
in
Highway 63, which was a
1942,
major route
further
then.
still
cementing
there.
Camden's
Most of
place
those
in
old service
Arkansas's
stations are gone
political
now.
history.
Quite a political
Demolished
legacy.
or repurposed.
It is,
But their
though it's
presence
interesting
back
the
then
source
shows
notes
the
the lack
square
of a
adapting to the
comprehensive impressive early mayoral list,
This has
suggesting
been a
there's
really
probably
rich
still more
look at
to
the
uncover
commercial
about
and civic
Camden's
life.
early leadership.
But there's a more
And you can really see
complex
this
layer,
history etched in the
difficult
physical landscape of
sometimes,
Camden, can't you?
regarding
in its
racial
architecture and how the town
Yes.
grew.
Oh, for
That's a
sure.
crucial part of the story.
The fact that streets
During
were
the
being
Jim
planned
Crow
as
era,
early as
late
1844
mid-20th
speaks to an
century,
early
the
vision
social
for organized
landscape of
urban
Warren
development.
Square was
And
sharply
that
divided.
1924
racially
Sanborn
divided.
fire
How
insurance
so?
map we
African
mentioned,
Americans were a
invaluable for
significant part
understanding
of
the
Bradley
details
County's
of downtown
population,
Camden
but they
during that
faced
period.
severe restrictions.
And the Washington Street
limited
Historic
access,
District is
limited
apparently a
participation in the
wonderful
public
showcase
space
of the
square.
evolution of
It was
architectural
white
styles
dominated. It
due
features
to
examples
French
ranging
customs,
from
discriminatory
revival,
laws.
Queen
Sounds like a
Anne,
time of strict
colonial
control,
revival,
inequality.
classical
It was,
revival,
marked by
even
violent
Spanish
enforcement of white
revival,
supremacy, especially
Mediterranean
in the late
and English
1800s.
revivals.
Wow, quite a mix.
Warren sadly
each
had
style
documented
reflecting
reflecting
the
the prevailing
between
tastes
1887
and
and
the economic
1903.
conditions of
Acts of
different
racial
eras.
terror
And specific
instilled
buildings
fear,
really tell a
underscored
story, too.
exclusion
They do.
from public life.
The
As
McCollum
segregation
Chitus
hardened,
House,
black
with its
residents were
elegant
expected
Greek
to use
revival
separate
style
facilities,
and materials
could freely
reportedly
mingle on the
sourced
square,
all the way
except
from
in
New
some serving
Orleans,
roles,
along with
often
early
Even public
luxuries.
buildings.
Yes, it's a
The
tangible
train depot
link
near the square,
to
built
Camden's
1907,
antebellum
had prosperity
explicit
and its prominent
white and
figures.
colored
Right.
waiting rooms.
And the Lee Gingham building we
segregation
talked
was
about earlier,
everywhere.
And this
originally built
extended
around
to
1850 in the
businesses
Greek
around the
revival
square.
style for
Accounts
commercial
from oral
purposes,
histories
then
suggest.
later served as the
Yes.
Freedmen's
Black
Bureau
customers
office,
often had to use
and eventually
back
became the
entrances
town's
at
first
white-owned
public
businesses
library.
on the
So
square.
it adapted over
Or
time.
relegated
Exactly.
to segregated
It really
seating, like
illustrates the
balcony at
adaptive
movie
reuse
theater.
of buildings
black
and the
community
evolving
developed
needs of the
alternatives.
community over
Exactly.
decades.
It
In
really
response,
highlights that
mirroring many southern
interconnectedness,
towns,
doesn't it?
Warren's
How
African American
economic
community
prosperity,
developed its
civic
own
leadership,
parallel
and the
business
development of
district,
community
separate from the
institutions
main
all went
square.
hand in hand.
Tell us about that
shaping
area.
the physical
Catfish
character of
Row,
the town.
was it?
Precisely.
Right.
A specific
The
block of
architectural
East Elm
styles
Street,
reflect
just north of the
periods of
railroad
economic
tracks, but
wealth
still
and
pretty
prevailing
close to the
cultural
courthouse.
tastes, while the
Became
establishment of
vibrant part
institutions and
black commerce
infrastructure
and
was
community
driven by
life.
both economic
Known
success
historically as
and
Catfish
the vision
Row.
of its
What was there?
leaders.
By
Now, is Camden
1907, it
moving to the
already had
modernizing
black-owned
south
eateries, barber
of a
shops, a
early to
boarding house,
mid-20th
central
century.
services.
We
And
see
it grew.
continued
Oh, it
transformation,
flourished.
especially with
Over
the
the next
looming
couple of
presence
decades, it
and then
became
the
a
reality
major
of the
hub.
World War.
By 1920,
Yes.
the industrial growth
A
continued
bottling
to be a
works,
significant factor.
confectionery,
International
pool hall,
Paper,
dry
established
cleaner,
back in
cobbler,
1927, remained a
barber,
major and
grocery,
stable employer.
Right.
all
IP.
black owned.
Local
Wow.
manufacturing
By
successes like
1931, the whole
Pottery and
block
Pet
had one
continued
and
to
two
thrive
story
and
brick
gain wider
buildings,
recognition.
multiple
The
restaurants,
earlier
a
regional
movie
oil boom
theater
provided
specifically for the
ongoing
black
economic
community,
stimulus.
a Dr. Pepper bottling
We even see
plant.
mentions in the
Even a
source
lodge
of early
hall for
20th century
fraternal
efforts in
organizations.
lignite
So it was
mining and
basically
oil distillation
A
in the area.
self-contained
So
downtown
still looking for resources.
black
Yeah,
residents.
indicating
Precisely.
a continuous
Catfish
search
Row
for
was
and
the de
development of
facto
natural
downtown
resources.
for Warren's
But the
African
period
American
encompassing
community
World War II
offered
and the early Cold
alternatives
War
to the
brought a
discrimination on the
truly
main square.
A
transformative
safe
and
space, a community
really
space.
significant
Right.
shift for
Enjoy
Camden.
entertainment at the
Camden
Black
became a
Operated
really
Theater without
important player
segregated
in the
seating.
nation's
Fraternal
defense
orders
efforts
met
during
in the
that
lodge
time,
hall.
didn't it?
Hammond's
certainly
Funeral
did.
Home,
First,
a
there
prominent
was
black
Camden
business,
Army
was their
Airfield,
founder's
also
initials
known
still
as
visible
Harold
on the
Field.
building that's left.
It operated
contrast
as a
must have been
pilot
stark.
training school
Especially
during
on
World
weekends.
War II.
Training
Catfish
pilots
Row
for the
bustling
war
with black
effort.
customers,
Exactly.
while the courthouse
Contributing
square
to the
block
immense
south was
need for
primarily
trained
white
pilots.
residents. But the
That
truly
physical
massive
separation
development was the establishment of the Shoemaker Naval Ammunition Depot, or
But
NAD,
there had to be
in
some interaction on the
1944.
main
Yeah,
square.
naval ammunition.
Out of necessity.
In
Yeah,
Arkansas.
some limited
Seems a bit
presence.
inland.
Black citizens
does,
had to go
doesn't
to
it?
the
But
courthouse,
this
pay
was a
taxes,
sprawling
official business,
68,000
might shop
acre
occasionally
facility.
at the few
It
white
represented
stores that
a
served
$60
them,
million
but often
investment
segregated
in an
service back
ordnance
doors,
plant
separate
specifically
counters.
designed
And during
for
big
production of
events,
rockets.
like the
60
tomato
million
festival.
in
Black
1940s
residents might
money.
gather
That's
around the
enormous.
edges of the main
It must
crowd,
have fundamentally
often
changed the
self-segregated.
landscape in the community.
Black
Oh, it was
school
a
bands
monumental
participated in
project. It
parades,
involved
for
a massive
instance,
effort to
but
drain
the
vast
spectators
areas of
lining the
land,
streets
construct an
likely remained
extensive
largely
network of
divided.
roads and
The
railways
civil rights
inside the
movement in the
depot,
60s.
and build
That
hundreds
eventually
of
brought
buildings,
change.
including the
gradual but
specialized production
transformative
facilities
changes,
and those
yes.
distinctive earth-covered
Warren
storage
schools
bunkers you still see
desegregated
evidence
relatively
of today.
peacefully
Right,
by the
the
late
igloos.
60s, following
Exactly.
Brown v. Board.
Rocket production began
Warren
in
was
April
fortunate to avoid the
1945,
intense
right near
conflict
the end
seen
of the
elsewhere.
war.
And on the square.
While some of the
As
construction
legal
activities
segregation
were scaled
ended,
back
black
after
residents
VJ
gained the
Day, the legal right to
depot was
patronize any
reactivated
business,
during the
participate
Korean
more
War.
fully in public
By
life.
1951,
But over
it
time,
employed around
Catfish Road
1,800
declined.
Why was
civilian
that?
workers.
Urban renewal
1,800
initiatives,
workers.
broader
That influx
economic
must have had a
shifts,
profound
many
impact
original
on the
buildings
existing
were
local
demolished.
community.
Absolutely
Today,
profound.
only
The rapid
one
increase in
single-story
population
brick
created a
structure
significant
remains as a
housing
reminder.
shortage in
And a
Camden.
business.
Where did everyone
Many
live?
closed or
Well, to
relocated
address
after
this, the Navy
integration.
actually
Moved
constructed
closer to the main
260 new
commercial
homes,
streets, seeking
essentially
opportunities
creating
in
a
the newly
whole new
desegregated
community that became known
environment.
as
So
East
the legal
Camden.
segregation is
Navy.
gone,
Yeah.
but the
No,
historical
the
legacy
Shoemaker NAD was ultimately
lingers.
deactivated in 1957,
Fading with time, but it's a
its
significant
legacy
part of
is
Warren's
undeniable
history.
and long-lasting.
You still see
It
historically
brought
black
massive
churches
federal investment
near
into
the
the
square,
region,
New
created
Zion,
thousands of
AME
jobs,
Zion,
spurred
St. James
significant
AME
population
pillars of the
growth,
community,
and truly integrated
testaments to
Camden
those
into the
parallel
national
structures.
defense
and the
industry.
square itself.
And the site
today.
didn't just
The
disappear.
courthouse
Right.
lawn,
No,
once
importantly,
almost
the
exclusively
transformation
white
of the
public
former
space,
depot into
now
the
much more
Highland
inclusive,
Industrial Park
used freely by
ensured its
everyone.
continued
Today,
economic
during the tomato
significance for the
festival, you
region
might
long
see black
after
and
the
white
Navy
kids
left.
playing together
So
on the
by
grass.
1955,
unimaginable back
the end
then.
point of our
Virtually
source
unimaginable
material.
in the Jim
Camden
Crow
had
era.
truly come full
So
circle.
the square
hadn't it?
transformed from a
that
microcosm
initial,
of a
unassuming
divided
spot on the
society into
Waitakere
a more
River,
integrated
it
civic
had navigated
space.
wars,
Even as the town remembers that
significant
complex
economic
history.
shifts,
Looking up from the
profound
center of the
social
square today.
transformations.
Indeed, its journey took it
It sounds
from
like you can really
an
see these
indigenous
layers of
crossroads to a
history
French
everywhere.
outpost,
Absolutely.
then an
Stand in the
American
middle,
riverport,
look
the Queen
around.
City, a
Tangible
significant
reminders,
location during the
echoes
Civil
everywhere.
War, a thriving
steeples in
railroad
the
era
distance.
timber
We mentioned
hub,
those earlier.
an early center for
First United
manufacturing,
Methodist West
and
on
ultimately
Church
a
Street,
key
First
contributor
Baptist
to the
South
nation's
on Main.
defense infrastructure.
They gave Church Street its
Quite
name.
a story.
And
What
throughout
else
all
stands
those
out?
different
Other
phases, certain
landmarks.
enduring
Look north,
themes
you see
seem
the
to
old
keep
Warren
coming up.
Water Tower.
The constant
Mid-20th
influence of the
century
Waitakere
town
River,
name
even when
painted
it
on
wasn't
it.
the main transport.
Familiar skyline
The
element.
cyclical
Closer in?
nature of its
Historic
primary economic
markers,
drivers,
plaques,
cotton,
that
timber, industry,
1936
defense,
centennial marker
the
on the lawn
remarkable
commemorating the
resilience
first
and
courthouse
community
site,
building of the African
a
American
veterans
population
memorial
in the
nearby,
face of,
and the
well,
streets
terrible
themselves.
That's really
Those
crucial.
historic
and a
red
lasting
bricks
impact
paved
of the
around
individuals, the leaders, the
1927, many still
entrepreneurs, the
there,
everyday people
often
who
with the
shaped its
tomato
course.
emblems.
Any
By
notable older
1955,
buildings just off
Camden
the
had
square?
firmly
Yes, a
established
couple
its
blocks south,
identity
Main
as a
and Central is the
significant
Etherington
industrial,
House.
commercial,
Beautiful
and
1926
transportation
Tudor
center.
revival home
It had a
on
much
the
more
National Register,
diversified and
reflects
resilient
the prosperity
economy
of that
than its
era.
earlier
East.
agricultural
East,
focus.
down Myrtle.
So not
The
just a
Donald
cotton
W.
town or a
Reynolds
timber town
YMCA
anymore?
started in
No,
1948,
the echoes of the
and
steamboat
early
era were
rural
still
Y
present
in
in its
Arkansas.
history and identity.
Further
Sure,
on, the high
but they
school
now
campus,
resonated alongside the
historically
hum
close
of
by.
modern
North,
industries
near
like
the
International
tracks.
Paper,
The site
and the
of the
lasting
old
impact
Warren
of
and
the
Wachita
Shoemaker
Valley
NAD.
Railroad Depot.
So the story
depot's
of
gone.
Camden by
Buildings are gone, yes.
1955 is
Built
really a
1909,
testament to the
rebuilt
power
1911
of
after a
continuous
fire,
adaptation,
but the
isn't it?
rail line still
Shaped by
crosses
its
Main
unique
Street,
geographical
a reminder
location,
of that lumber
the major
shipping
currents
role.
of
Even the
American
street names
history,
themselves
and the
offer
persistent
clues, you said.
efforts and
They certainly
ingenuity
do.
of its
Main
people.
Street,
Well
always
said.
the
It
main
really
one.
makes you think,
Myrtle Street,
how
east.
even towns that might
Likely
appear
named
small
for
or
myrtle
perhaps
trees,
overlooked
part of
today
maybe a
can
floral
hold
tree name
incredibly
pattern there.
complex and significant
Early maps
histories.
show a Chestnut
Histories
Street
that in
north
many
of the
ways
square
reflect
area,
the broader trends
hinting
and
at that tree name
transformations of
pattern
the
for
entire
East-West
nation.
Streets.
Yeah.
Every
Pennington
place
Street,
has these
north
layers.
of
The
the
tracks
Depot.
near the depot
It
site
makes you wonder,
likely echoes Pennington
what are the
Settlement,
forces,
an early name
geography,
for the area.
technology,
And
human
Splon.
resilience that
The
are
landowner.
shaping the
Amazing.
communities around us today in ways that we might not even fully appreciate yet? Something to think about.